Speaking of food, I am deep in it, feeding every 3 hours and the whole thing. So don't mind me if I run out of here right afterward. But it's so great to be with you guys. So we had one day Yoon here, Sujin Lee, and they wrote this incredible book that came out just 2 years ago. Variety on, you guys can buy it anywhere. We're gonna be talking about a lot of the topics that are in the book. Food and just how food is a vessel when it comes to having really hard conversations. And I think it's so interesting. We were sitting right there having some hard conversations while eating. It was so much easier to have those conversations. I just met you to talk to me about using food as this vessel.
Yeah, so in our book, we dedicate our book chapter, but even beyond the chapter, there is a lot of food reference. So, if you're not familiar with our book, it's called Where I Belong, Healing Trauma and Embracing Asian American Identity. There's a copy of it. So, part of this book, what inspired us to write this book was that early pandemic where Asian hate crimes were happening, but not talked about in the media yet. In our communities, we were worried about our parents, our moms, dads, and our kids, but no one else was talking about it. Both of us were therapists, and we have a practice that didn't intend to be focused on Asian Americans, but because during the time, people were looking for therapists who look like them because they are starting to feel like I don't feel understood by my non-Asian therapist right now and what's going on at my workplace. I feel so invisible. So they started looking for therapists who look like them, which is very uh, wild because Asian Americans for the longest time, it still is the lowest percentage of seeking mental health services. So during the time, the mental health crisis, and I just never seen that many Asian American clients coming into therapy. And then most of our first time therapy seekers too. We didn't feel like it was enough having one-on-one conversation because even though you can feel that moment of connection with your therapist, we're craving more space, community, other people that felt connected to share what was going on. So we started support groups, was volunteer cause online support group for Asian Americans, just to process what's happening, get validation, and just learn a little bit more about why this was happening because we really felt like the historical aspect was really important. And then that's how we create a whole curriculum like 8 to 10 weeks, having a cohort that went through the journey of learning about Asian American history, what's happening, and then also process their own identities. And that support became the inspiration of our book. So in this book, we have stories because part of the support group was sharing our stories and unpacking them. So when we were writing this book, we were interviewing a lot of people who participate in our support group, and we also did a call out for anyone who want to share their story to be included in this book. And something that I keep hearing, even though I didn't intend it, is that people keep mentioning food over and over again. I think half of the book stories have some kind of food reference. And then that's when I realized, like, oh, like also reflecting myself too, like how important the food aspect is in our culture, how we relate in our identity, and also our well-being as well in families. So I'll pass it to Jen.
So when Leona have reached out to us about how to make that, the general topic was, of course, Asian American mental health and well-being. And we have thought so much about how do we, of course, talk about mental health and well-being, but how we also not only talk about it, but experience the sense of wellness and care for each other. And of course, food is a way that we do that, as we had just talked about. It's something that we do for other people. It's something that we serve to other people. It's something that brings our identity together. And it's something that we also nourish ourselves with. And so we always have to engage our sensories when it comes to taking care of our bodies. And the most basic format of taking care of our body and making it calm and peaceful and finding a sense of safety is breathing. And then the next thing is eating. And so we wanted to be sure that when we are talking about mental health and well-being, especially because we were going to be a group of women, that we were going to feed each other and talk about it at the same time. So here we are today. I'm glad we're doing that at the same time. There's so many families across the Asian American diaspora that use food often to bridge the gap, to make connections rather than words sometimes. How does that work? How have you seen that shape the families that you work with?
Well, I'm sure a lot of you, instead of I'm sorry or I love you, like, do you want to eat this? Or have you eaten? Can I give you rice? Literally in Korean, when you greet somebody, it's like 밥 먹었어, which means have you eaten rice? That's literally the Korean in Korea. So the food aspect is so important. A lot of Asian parents, immigrant parents, and Asian parents, generally speaking, may not be good at expressing their emotions. However, we have learned the food is a love language. The food is how we take care of each other. So like I have many memories personally too. And then we hear from our clients too that like I will never hear my mom saying I love you, I'm sorry, but they will call me spurts, as apology after our fight. So that is such a personal story for me too. It's like we have a little fight or conflict, and then a few hours later, my mom just silently knocking the door and then just bringing just all for my mom, it was apples and a pear, the Asian pear, and then cut out and then just like it was like silently leaving it right outside my room. And then like I'll open and then I'm like, okay. I mean, there's definitely ways that we have improved, but that for childhood when we didn't know how to really have a communication, that was our communication, the food, and somehow we are supposed to pick that up.
No, when I was learning to become a therapist, the right way to do therapy had everything to do with verbalizing our thoughts. It was verbalizing the healing journey, and healing journey included verbalizing the trauma. And it was the only right way to heal ourselves. And that was how I was taught. And so reflecting back on my parents' journey and my journey and all the trauma that we have experienced and how much we have not verbalized it, I felt this sense of almost shame that we couldn't heal through it. And yet I was reflecting on my mom's stage of life right now, where she hasn't quite yet verbalized everything, the abuse, the immigration trauma, and just so many different things that she has endured in her childhood. I thought about how she's still healing though. And I couldn't figure out the missing link between, wait a minute, my traditional therapy knowledge is telling me that she's not healing because she hasn't talked about it. And yet I see her thriving and I see her happy and I actually feel her body changing and opening up in a way that feels different than when I was growing up. What's changed? What's shifted? And I realized that shift had a lot to do with her being able to finally nourish herself in a different way. When she stopped becoming a mom first and she started becoming a woman first for herself is when her entire development has shifted and changed. And this only happened very recently too, at a very later age of her life. And so I think there's a lot to say about a healing journey that we can take with ourselves, the way that we nourish ourselves, the way that we identify ourselves, the way we care for ourselves differently in the relationship that we also have with the food and the recipes also, right? And the way that we relate that can also become part of a healing journey too. Because that's something that we get often asked as therapists. It's like, well, how do I get my mom to talk about this? That is so deep and dark and secretive sometimes. And I feel like she needs to talk about it in order for her to feel better about it. Yes, there are very important elements to be able to name and formalize the things that has happened to us. And there are alternative ways in which our body can still process trauma differently too. And so both of these things combined actually will create a more holistic healing. So it was actually the other way around. When she started eating better, sleeping better, taking care of herself better, when she started actually cooking for us, not out of survival, but out of joy, that she was able to open up and talk about some of the things that she's never also talked about in the past too. But if it was the other way around, where we were trying to force her to talk about it first, I don't think we would have been where we are today with our relationship.
I also want to add is we use this conversation a lot because we have a lot of immigrant adult children coming to us. And they care about their parents' well-being, right? The trauma they went through, they see the struggle, or sometimes, really impacting their relationships. So a lot of times, like, how do I get my parents to therapy? They, of course, we cannot force anyone. So if they're not willing, we start to suggesting like there are different ways. Therapy is not the only answer. The only answer to healing, only answer to intergenerational conversation, and we start exploring. And a lot of times where we end up is food again. How is it experiencing cooking together or sharing recipes, asking? Once in a while, they'll be like, my mom doesn't want me in the kitchen. Like, she wants control, then I cannot have conversation. I'm like, okay, can we have different ways about asking food without making her feel like she has to teach you? We problem solve. However, the conversation goes around food and how that has been the language of love and care. And if they're able to kind of start making food together, a lot of times clients report back saying, it was interesting that things that she didn't share before, like it started to come out a little bit. So we were doing activity together. There's like less pressure, right? Like when you're trying to sit down, let's have conversation. Like that's just scary for a lot of immigrant parents. But when we are doing some kind of activities, there's some joy, shared joy that's coming out. And it makes their guard down a little. They might start from talking about food, where they learn how to make it or the different ingredients. And that kind of leads to, their history, how they grew up. And that's the opening way for the relationship and healing journey there.
I definitely have a family member who I would love to. I hope to do therapy at some point in their lives. I'm sure there's many people here where they have that family member. Maybe they've been hoping or quietly urging, nudging. How do you? I mean, you're talking about how food is a great entryway into that. Break it down for us. Once you start eating or you start cooking together and you open up that conversation, how do you lead to, oh, you're cooking and by the way, you should see a therapist, right? Like, how does it's a big jump, right? I don't know, I remember who my sister and I were concerned and getting things really often. You just really feel like they should see a doctor. My sister led that conversation, but tell us the best way to do it.
Oh, I don't know if there's a best way that fits all. And maybe the goal isn't to get them to therapy. Yeah, we're therapists, please go there. But you also do not believe therapy is the answer for everything too. It can be very life changing. It can really give healing to it. So a lot of immigrant parents, feelings are scary and there may take years or they may never get to a place that they might feel like I want to talk about my feelings or I'm ready to talk about feelings. Like I had conversations with adult immigrant children, like parents may never get there. And you might have to accept that. Like how would that look like for you? And know that there's other ways. And if one thing leads to another to therapy, Suji and I actually have stories about how we got our moms to therapy, by the way. Like to get your parents to therapy. Let me finish. But yeah, so conversation will be like, is there shared activities? Like food is the main one that we share, but then like, hey, your mom, go to park, go on a walk or do Tai Chi, or is there a hobby that she does that you can join in, right? Like shared activities definitely lowers the defenses and open up conversation doorways. And as she's sharing, you can also share. Also practicing like how do we share? Like you might want to model because sometimes like if you are able to model that, your parents might pause and make them think something, make them want to also share something, right? So like having and shared activity because talking about feelings is scary. So have that. That could be a good way. But for my mom, we've been therapists for 10 years by this time, right? Like more than 10 plus years. And then we often talk about how, because concept of therapy, mental health was so not there when we became therapists. Both of our parents thought we were working in like a hospital setting. We were having more like severe mental health issues, right? So they were kind of concerned about us. They're like, are you safe? Like crazy people following you? I'm like, no, that's not what I do. So they were very limited perception of what we did, and then how therapy could help themselves. during pandemic, my mom has a history of depression. So she will go through periods of time where it's very severe. She cannot get up, and even thoughts about not wanting to live. And she never thought about seeking help because that wasn't something she grew up with. Suppress it, maybe talk to your friend, but keep your face and just pretend everything fine until you get over it, right? And then during pandemic, things got even worse. And this time I actually had a conversation with her. I think I gave her a little bit of ultimatum, but I was like, Mom, like, you need to go to therapy. I guess there's no ultimatum. I just told her that she needs to go to therapy. And then I told her, but she didn't want to spend the money. She always thought it was stupid for people to go to therapy and spend money to talk about your feelings when you can go to your friends, or you can just, just not talk about it. So I told her this is what I did a few years back. So I told her, I found a therapist for you. I think she'll be great. I paid for 5 sessions. There's no refund. There's no refund. So you have to go. And then she was like, I think her heart was a little bit open by then. I've been therapist and been telling her about what I actually do. She was still kind of, didn't want to really show that she was open. She was a little shy about talking about it. But I think because I said it, she was like, well, if there's no refund. And then she went 5 times, and then she paid for her 5 additional sessions. Hopefully 10 sessions.
It's so interesting that you guys are both talking about your mothers. You were talking about your mother as well. Women also carry this incredible burden of always being the one fooling everyone too, right? Tell me how you found the right therapist for your mother? How would you even figure out, like, this is the person my mom would like?
So my mom I didn't sign up for my mom for therapy in a threatening way. This might have worked better actually. But what I did was therapeutic journey, not just therapy, right? We're talking about wellness and this healing journey here today. And this healing journey, as we were talking about food and the importance of sensory, is all about finding a sense of that fun and joy back into our lives. Wellness, it really is creating more opportunities for that joy and fun things back into our lives again. Caregivers, as women, we carry a lot of other people's needs that we forget that life should be joyful. So when my mom was in the depressive state, I remembered all these times when I was in Korea. So we were immigrants, myself as well. And in Korea, my mom used to be this very creative woman. And she made everything in the household, from the coasters to the clock on the wall. She grew plants, and we had these giant plants all around the ceilings of our house. She crocheted. She was that woman that made all of the baby, clothes and baby foods, and that's what I grew up with. And she had lost that as an immigrant. There was no time for that. There was no time for creativity at all. And I think I get some of that creativity mindset from her. And she allowed me to be creative. So she was giving herself so that I can have a life of creativity. So when she started becoming depressed, that was a thing that I was thinking about in the healing journey. Journey needed to have an element of creativity back into her life. And that was what was going to heal her. And so I started looking for an art therapist because they don't have to necessarily talk about it. Arts therapist. So they don't necessarily have to begin by saying, tell me about your trauma. You begin by talking about perhaps some of the tangible actual things that you would like to create, and with a pen and paper. And so it really feels a lot more in tune with the way that her mind works, and finding a way that can shift her story about herself within her mind. And so I found her an art therapist, and she wasn't really wanting to see somebody one-on-one, a therapist either, right? And so I told her I signed her up for this art therapy group. But it was like a art therapy support group. And I didn't exactly call that therapy either. I said it's just a group of women, and there's gonna be 5 of them, and they're gonna go for the next like five weeks. And every week it was over Zoom. This was in the midst of COVID. I'm just gonna turn on this laptop, and there's gonna be groups of women. They're gonna talk about stuff. They may not, But she's going to give you some art prompts, and I would love for you to just engage back into pen and paper again for you. Because I remember, and I told her this too, I just remember having such warm thoughts, even as a child, of the things that you used to draw for me or the things that you used to make for me. Because she was so handsy, she was so good with the clay. When she heard her daughter say that, like, then she also remembered what her hands used to do before she was just cleaning all day long. Right? And I saw the shift in her eyes, and she was willing. She was like, okay, I don't think that's exactly what it's going to do for me. Right? She didn't know what she was getting herself into, but she did say, all right, well, I'll participate. And at the end of it, she was very happy. She didn't end up signing up for, extra 5 sessions. That's not it. But she came out with something different, another tool for her to go through the video journey.
It is so incredible that you knew about that and were able to identify this is what would resonate with my mom and made that connection. What are other types of food or rituals that have helped maybe you guys or helped the people you've interviewed in your book get through really hard times?
Yeah, so I interviewed a biracial Black Korean man where he really struggled with his identity being biracial and also connecting to his Korean culture because he also grew up in a very predominantly Black neighborhood and he tried to fit in. So he often like try to hide his Korean identity. However, like at home, his mom will make Korean food and then like totally make him make them too because she was so busy. Like he needs to learn how to make food, and then he really enjoyed it. But then he also pretended he didn't like it when he was a teenager. But he said, even though I acted like I didn't want to, but when I asked him to make it, it just felt like a meditative thing for me. Like my mom will share about where she learned how to make this kimchi from her mother, and then like the recipe that was shared. It was opening the door to history that he didn't really get to experience, but through food, he was able to make sense as have a connection. And now, as married and have kids himself, he teach his kids to make this Korean food that he learned. And that is it's a way to connect. And he says he's still very meditative. It feels like he's very zen, meditative, and then also sense of like connection and to his heritage. So
I wanted to name that, we're here trying to talk about all the great things how food bring us together. And also want to mention and acknowledge that we have very complicated relationships with food too, because as women especially, we're taught to eat and to not eat, right? It's like food's supposed to nourish us. And yes, yeah, oh, haven't you eaten yet? Have you eaten yet? And when we start to eat, it's like, you're eating too much, right? You're going to get so many mixed messages that we also receive as women and growing up around food too. And there's perhaps the identity piece around being Asian American has to do with, I think a lot of us hold pieces of trauma in relation to our foods that are so dear and traditional to us too. Very often in our stories, we also have plenty of people talking about how their food was not accepted at the school setting within their friends, was made fun of. These are stories that we also carry as well. And so part of the healing journey and the story that Linda had mentioned is really finding the different pieces of our lives that's been rejected, that's been neglected through society, but also within ourselves too, that we have been neglected and rejected, and reclaiming that back in a way that makes sense for us. And examples of that is like fusion food. We were talking a lot about fusion food too. And there's a reclamation, and steep is a reclamation of identity, their pieces of their home, bringing it back here and presenting it in a way that makes sense for them now in this stage in life.
You bring up such a good point about how food, yes, it's a vessel to deal with trauma, but food can also be trauma for some people. So what does nourishment look like then beyond food?
So food is, again, we're just talking about it's only a vessel, right? And so you want to have the relationship with the food and nutrients that makes sense to you. There's also overload of messages out there about everything. Pop psychology and pop nutrition is everywhere. And so we want to be able to receive and only receive and take in the information that makes sense to you and your own identity. As women, and especially as mothers, take care of yourselves. Really, though, take care of yourselves first. And that permission needs to come from a place of a very, very basic place of like, who are you making the food for? Oftentimes it's only for other people, right? And so make food for yourself. Make food that makes sense and makes joy for you first before you add anyone else's mix and stories into that ingredient.
What is the food that brings you guys joy?
I'm Korean. I like spicy food, even though it's not really good for my stomach.
In particular, Linda is always like, can we get tteokbokki?
It's like Korean street food that is just rice cakes and
The spicier the better. My comfort food is always egg and rice. It's the most basic thing. And if you think about your own, comforting food for you, it provokes emotions. Oftentimes it's the emotion behind the food that really creates the identity and stories for us. And so again, food is only a vessel. It's the emotions that we're carrying all around the food that creates the thing.
So fascinating for you guys talk about all the different layers of what food can help us deal with trauma and approach trauma and therapy. I have the 2-month-old that I told you guys about, and feeding has been traumatic. Just in almost every aspect I can think of, right? It's just from birth and breastfeeding and formula and pumping and all of it.